included them up to 7 months. We have accepted them in the sample. So that is, but the trend is that some of them, although the work stops in May, some of them stay till May, June. So the migration typically, the advance is given at around in October. Migration starts late December, and then it continues up to May in most cases, but it also continues to June. So thus, the there are a variety of them, but those who really control, then they are mostly from the from outside the state and from the district headquarters and subdivisional headquarters. Those who police this, those who are in charge of supervision at the ground level, many of them the agents of the Sardars, they belong to the villages, mostly from the similar castes, but not necessarily tribes. Most of them are either caste Hindus or scheduled caste people. So that's the link between the local community and the Sardars. Regarding neoliberal, I think what I meant is that migration is not being. If I have given that impression, then I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that neoliberal economy has created seasonal migration. Seasonal migration, as I said, has a long history. What I tried to say is that during the neoliberal reforms, agrarian sector has come under a policy-induced crisis as well, and which has aggravated some forms of migration. Out migration. So I didn't mean to say that it is caused necessarily by neoliberal reforms, but there is a link to agrarian distress. And cotton similarly, it is not caused by labor shortage induced by seasonal migration again. Cotton is being independently pushed in the rain-fed areas by the market players as well as by the state. It has been declared as one of the state policies for the rain-fed areas. And yes, that is why we find it doesn't solve the labor problem. That is why we see both kind of problems. There is laborer complaining that we do not have work enough to survive in the village for the whole period. At the same time, cultivator households saying that we do not have enough labor. The crucial question here is that most agricultural laborer households are now they are going to decide at some point in the year whether they are going to look for an agriculture based livelihood strategy combining it with NREG and other things, or they are going to out-migrate. Out-migration means the collapse of the livestock economy, collapse of their linkages with agriculture. So gradually they are moving out, as I said. But as I said, some of them are also investing this money in continuing agriculture. Here, just one point which was not asked here but was discussed earlier, that all these policies in the rural areas, enhancing the income and security of labor households and cultivators, are they in any way designed to discourage migration? I would like to suggest that whatever evidence we have seen from repeated field works, that there is a clear link between the success of these interventions and the amount of advance that the seasonal migrants are getting. So even if the programs are working somewhere towards increasing wage rates in the local areas or having better schools in terms of better schools or better infrastructure, it is helping. Mobile phones, for example, has created a great deal of difference on freedom of labor. Migration is freedom enhancing and bondage enhancing, and also it is because of non-economic factors. That point is well taken. Only thing what I am trying to say is that state intervention or civil society intervention is probably needed more when we know that that certain kinds of migration is actually bondage enhancing. That's the point that I was trying to make.
Okay. To the question on the cycle of the crop of sugarcane, I would like to clarify that UNICEF worked for the sugarcane migration workers, although in that district and in neighboring districts, they also do stone cutting, stone crushing, cotton ginning, construction worker, as well as sugarcane. But we worked on the sugarcane seasonal migration because we saw a big pattern over the last 4 to 5 years now, steadily. And the way it works is that there is somebody called a mukaddam who's like a contractor who pays a hefty amount of about 40,000, 50,000 to the family. And that is like indebted, making the family indebted for the next season as well. And bulk of that 40 or 50,000 that the family receives is again used to pay back the earlier debt. In many cases, the family cannot repay, again goes back into debt. On the issue of what is human rights perspective to migration, UNICEF is on the 4 principles of child survival, which is about um, health and nutrition, development, which is about education, protection, which we've just seen, and participation. That is, nothing shall be done without the active participation of the child. So, in using these 4 principles of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, we are trying to ensure that whether in origin or in transit or in the destination and back to origin, these principles of child survival, development, protection, and participation is ensured. And the coverage in Jalna has, from one block, it went to all the whole district, which is 8 blocks. And now it has gone beyond Jalna district as well to all the neighboring districts in Aurangabad division where the issue is. Thanks.
Yes. Thanks a lot. It's actually very interesting that Deepak and you, both of you, have taken up areas areas in your paper, which I had focused on exactly 10 years ago, where I did looked at both children in sugarcane farms, as well as the KBK districts and the seasonal migration streams there, in the context of a study that I was doing for the American India Foundation, which you might have looked at this thing. The 2 points that I want to make, and I think these are both very interesting studies. They're both on seasonal labor migration. They're both rural to rural labor migration. They both cover dominant streams. You just clarified that they don't cover all the streams of migration which emanate from these regions. The 2 main points I want to make is, first, that when we look at, for example, strategies to alleviate distress migration and child migration, child labor, and so on, now history shows us in India, and looking at policies, that policies need to be designed very carefully, and they need to be contextualized in the context of what Deepak says, strategies of accumulation. Because it seems to me that capital actually in India at the bottom is more footloose than labor. Okay, I looked at, for example, I looked at children in carpet weaving over a 20 to 25-year period, and I saw child labor move from factories to karkhanas, and then capital followed child labor into all the way up to North Bihar, and then child labor re-entering, leaving. I mean, not only concentrated in carpet industry, but getting into spinning and various other industries in that same locale. So, is the net sum? Has there been a net sum gain in terms of the incidence of child labor, and the same child labor, by the way, then ending up near Delhi in NCR doing other things from Bihar as well as from UP? Frankly, I don't know. I've asked this question often to Kailash and others, and I really don't know how much headway has been made. Uh, and in so even and in terms of learning the institutional thing, for example, UNICEF, for example, in sugarcane harvesting, I really don't know how much UNICEF. I mean, I'm extremely fond of the way UNICEF has taken up issues and has worked with them, but how much it has factored over the history of interventions, both at the NGO level and its own organizational interventions, in some of these areas which go back 20, 30 years in many cases. I'm not too sure, because I think that there is a static and partial understanding of many of these issues, which, despite the way they look at it, is not often, it's a very complex thing. And I'll come back to just very briefly to Deepak Singh, because to understand this complex of issues around incidents of seasonal migration, deprivation, child labor, and so on, you have to look at the interrelationship between agrarian change, ecology, irrigation, uh, and labor and capital. In the context of all of this, and basically looking at, and it's a two-way. I think you very correctly pointed out, it's a two-way street between migration and agrarian change, for instance. Cotton cultivation. I was recently looking at Gujarat and Rajasthan, and the way cotton seed promotion, and that's, by the way, also the Odisha story. Because what has happened is this cotton seed production is now going into the hinterland. It's going into tribal districts in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana and now Odisha. Okay, so you're finding a very different dynamic. The same thing is happening in Gujarat. where it has gone from, some districts, Sabarkantha and others, into the tribal hinterland and tribal districts, and into the tribal districts of Rajasthan. And it is equally detrimental to children's health and the very long hours of participation in work and so on and so forth. It's a very complex set of issues. When you start looking at the persistence of deprivation and seasonal migration uh, from these kind of interrelationships, really one wonders where does one tackle it, and how much progress have we actually, after the incidents in Delhi, which happened some days ago, where the same children were involved, came from the same districts, where where carpet production eventually moved into in North Bihar. So then you start wondering, what exactly, how does one deal with these issues?
With clarification, and when we use the word urban, does it have anything to do with the employment of male in a particular sector? Because the way when I learned, I mean, not much, but whenever I learned it, I mean, I was told that agriculture or say rural area is that where 75% of the male population is engaged in primary sector. So obviously by default, the urban sector, which is not rural, will be depending on the employment of the male, force in that area. So
that's true. The definition of the statutory town looks at 75% of the adult male population being in non-agrarian occupations.
plus population density.
Yeah, plus density.
Yeah, I mean, there are three criteria, but one of the major criteria is
Yeah,
that.
it is.
So fine. I mean, I just wanted to find whether my understanding is correct or not.
75% male working main workers, not the marginal workers. Marginal workers you get.
Yes, my concern with the Madam Chandrasekhar. She mentioned in her presentation that for the education purpose, they are covering and providing some amount for the child. And you mentioned that it has a 8,200 rupees you are giving to the direct benefit to them. Is it specific to the Jalna district or neighbor district? Because as my knowledge, because I am belonging from the B district, and I am also part of the sugarcane cutters, so I am very close to them. So as my knowledge, at the last year, which was given per day 42 rupees per child per day, it means 1260 rupees for the month, and it is revised latest, I think in the just last month, just now beginning this scheme, which is providing the this kind of facilities to the students, and which is now is a 47 rupees as my knowledge. It is in the situation of Bir district, and neighbor district in the like Osmanabad, maximum around 80% and more than that of the peoples, means who are unskilled, they are going to migrate for this purpose. So any kind of more facilities which are providing by the UNICEF, this is the major stuff. Thank you.
So UNICEF, first of all, as a UN agency, does not do direct implementation. That is the starting point. So what we intervened in Jalna was as an innovation to test what can work in Jalna for sugarcane cutting and then advocate to the government to take it forward. So we have not spent that 8,000. That 8,200 is money that we leveraged from the education department based on what success they saw from Jalna for every child who stays back to go into the account of the child, not even into the account of the grandparent who was the caretaker. And in Bede, I forgot to mention that there was also an issue of sugarcane cutting, where if the woman is mensurating and she cannot cut the sugarcane, then she gets half. I mean, the husband only gets the weight. So women as young as 20 and 24 went in for hysterectomy so that they could be free to earn double wages. And child marriage is actually a driver of child migration, because the earlier you get two pairs of hands as opposed to one, you're actually propelling household income. This is what the bead story told us. This is also true of Jalna and of Marathwada region, which I forgot to mention. But the 8,200 was money that the SSA put in. And after about 2 years of implementation, the district administration of Jalna decided, let's try without giving in Jalna, but give in all the neighboring districts to see whether the grandparents will still take care of the child who is staying back. Now, I will not comment whether it was a foolish decision or not a foolish decision, but time will tell, because it was only less than a year ago that they've decided to withdraw only for Jalna, while the neighboring districts continue to get it. Thank you.
My own experience tell me that most of the children who stayed back with the grandparents were the boys.
No, anybody below 9 is what the community decided, boy or a girl. But so long as it's the grandparents, that is the grandmother and grandfather, they were okay with it, girl.
Community apart, most of the kids who are left back are the boys, and which is why schooling for boys is not that much of a problem as for girls, because the girls go out with their parents and they want to keep the girls under their control. Any other question?
So the question is ki in nutrition programs, one of the things that I have observed is ki whenever vulnerable groups are given this kind of a commodified, focused nutrition to one of the persons within the family, its receipt, the reception of it, the overall dynamics surrounding it are quite complex. And here, this is not even grain which is given. There is a direct money which is deposited. Are there any studies, are there any observations about what actually happens in the family? There is money coming in the name of one child, right? There might be other children in the home. So,
Our experience in Jalna has said that, let's say in a family, two households, two children stay back, they get 16,400. So nobody is discriminated between one child and another so long as they are above 9 years of age and they have decided to continue studies in that district, which is the origin district, they get per child. The others could be either the grandparents or the uncles or aunt who are not eligible for 8,200. So there's no discrimination between.
but there are. For example, I'll just tell you in Melghat, for example, when there was a difference created about the most malnourished children, then the ones who are on the borderline, and there is a focused nutrition which is given there. This actually created within families a kind of a competition to also kind of classify the child as more malnourished. And this is something which has been kind of observed by people who are like long-term workers in Melghat. And I'm asking from that point.
Two things I would like to say here. On supplementary nutrition program that is given for the undernourished children, there is something called severely acute and there is something called moderately acute. If you give the MAM child the food of a SAM child, that MAM child is going to fall sick. The SAM child only can get that RUTF, which is the ready to use, and not the MAM. So in a family, there could be a MAM and a SAM child, but the food, which is an additional benefit only for the SAM, is scientifically proven that cannot and should not be given to a MAM child because it will lead to further complications. The absorption of the child, the absorption of that food in the child's body is not going to work. That is on nutrition. But in terms of other facilities, like if there are, let's say, the brothers' children or somebody who are staying, so long as they have migrating parents, those children of those migrating parents are also entitled. And therefore, this Bal Mitra whom we have employed there in Jalna and neighboring districts, it is the job of the Bal Mitra to also educate communities on what will be given, to whom it will be given, and when it will be given. So Bal Mitra was not just for recreation, but also to inform families about this amount. And that is how, with this Sarpanch getting involved, the Gram Panchayat getting involved, we have reached some level. I'm not saying everything is free. I mean, it's free from design fault. There could be still some leakages or some slippages which we are aware of, and probably which we are not aware of. But what we have seen on the field shows that enrollment, I mean, kids in Jalna are now going back to school. They are staying in school, they're attending school. They're not dropping out as used to be the case earlier. And that for me is one indicator of what this program could have done or established over.
Well, it remains for me now to thank the panelists very much and the participants. We have been instructed to end on time because we all have planes to catch. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It is exactly 4 o'clock now. Sorry, after round of applause. Thank you so much. It's exactly 4 o'clock. And we'll break for a cup of tea, 5 minutes, so that 5 to 7 minutes, that's the break. You could always bring your cup of tea inside. They could also serve, but so that we have an opportunity to step out. So if you do that, we'll come back in 5 to 7 minutes and we'll start the conclusion.